Yo, this is Robot here. Vespa Motorsport, scooterwest.com. I'm on my Rally 200. There's one thing I see a lot of new owners of vintage Vespas. You know, these things don't have the modern convenience of like a modern car where you turn the key to start and it will always start without touching anything. You know, they all have their like unique little personalities to them when you're starting them. And a lot of times it takes a lot of just like knowing your bike and how to start it, knowing if it's warm or cold or how it likes to be finessed when you first start it. You know, to avoid making a fool of yourself and completely flooding it. You know, of course, a lot of it has to do with how well your bike's tuned up and everything's set perfect. Your carburetor's not leaking fuel, your ignition system's strong, you have good compression. All those take play in a good starting vintage Vespa. This Vespa's had very little done to it. It's had some of the wiring done to the ignition system. All the oil seals have been replaced in the engine, but the rest of the internals of the engine are all original. It's a very low miles bike. It's under 7,000 miles. So compression's really good. The muffler's not clogged up. Carburetor has been completely overhauled with a new needle, fuel line. The fuel tap's functioning fine. But let me go into how you start a bike, you know, or one of these vintage Vespas. It kind of also applies to Lambrettas, anything else that's kind of a vintage two-stroke shifty scooter. You got a couple controls down here. You know, not all scooters have ignition key switches. Actually, most of them, vintage Vespas, don't have a key switch at all. But there's a key switch for the ignition. You got your fuel tap. Some American ones have this plasticky lever that tells you what positions are on, reserve, or off. Oftentimes that plastic fuel tap thing is no longer mated to the original fuel tap, so the positions might not be correct. But for the normal Vespa, you have 3 positions. And on PXs, anything with a fuel gauge, it's a 2-position fuel tap. When you have the lever pointing to the left, that's closed. That means your fuel's off and there's no fuel flowing to the carburetor. You want to always make sure you don't fill your fuel tank to the brim. Keep it within like 20 millimeters or 1 inch from the top, because that tends to want to flood the Vespas over too. You know, it's got plenty of gas. That's your run position. Say you're riding down the road, you start feeling the scooter starting to cough out. You can reach down there, put on your reserve position. That gives you about 2 more liters of fuel. You know, depending on the Vespa, might be able to go as, you know, far as 50 miles or 80 kilometers. But you want to put it on the run position. This model's got a key. You know, key comes out. If you turn it to the run or on position, the key stays in. So it's in the run and start position. Different models like PXs have it here on the column. P200Es have a key on the top. GSs, they've changed the positions of the keys quite a bit on different Vespas. That's your choke knob right there. The engine, well, I did start it like 10 minutes ago, but it still is pretty cool, so it should start okay with the choke on. Have my hand on the throttle. I tend to always like to start the scooters when they're not on the stand. I see a lot of people sometimes got to do it on a stand, straddling the scooter. I always tip them to the left just a little teeny bit so you get a full throw of the Kickstarter. And it didn't really need the choke, but what I did is I just gave it ever so slightly small amount of gas to get it started. It didn't take much to start it. But I want to see if I can flood the bike. I want to show you how to clear out a flooded bike. You know, or typically if you're starting one that's warm, you know, the bike's already warmed up, you don't need the choke. So fuel's already on run. I didn't leave the fuel on, but I didn't even touch the gas, it just started up. Sometimes you want to give them a little bit of gas to start, just kind of depends on the nature of the scooter, you know. But I'm going to flood the scooter out artificially. Okay, they tend to want to flood out pretty bad when they're leaning to the right. It's just the way the downdraft carburetors work on any of these rotary valve Vespas. Pretty much most Vespas for 59 and later. Motor's a little bit warm. It's probably a little flooded since I did lean it to the right. I'm going to try to start a flooded bike. So typically, if I know it's flooded, I'd probably, it's going to be a little bit flooded right now. You want to tip it as far to the left, choke is off, and try starting it with about a quarter throttle. So a full kick. And I had the throttle open. The first time I tried to kick it, about quarter throttle, didn't want to light. The next time I went about half throttle, and you heard the motor rev and kind of clear right out. Sometimes if they're really flooded, you're going to have to continue to hold the throttle open to clear out the flood. A good running Vespa shouldn't be really too flooded. Before, say I'm done riding it for the day, if I'm going to store the bike and not use it for 2 weeks or something, I'll leave the fuel tap on the closed position, and I'll run the fuel out of the carburetor. So leave the ignition running, let it run out of fuel. If I know I'm going to come back to it and everything's working perfect on a scooter, I don't suspect it's going to flood itself, I'll just turn the ignition right off right away. But I'll show you kind of running the fuel out of the bowl. So right now, you can see how it's racing. Now there's no fuel in the carburetor because it's burned all the fuel that was in the fuel line and the carburetor float bowl. So that's always a good way. Say you're not going to use the scooter for a while, or if you're having a known problem where it's flooding, just run the scooter with the fuel tap closed. If it never dies on you, you know you got a problem with the fuel tap. The fuel tap's leaking fuel into the engine. One thing to keep in mind is if you got a battery ignition, turn the ignition off after you do that. So that's the best way to park the scooters. It's usually the way I do anytime I put them in the garage. So next time I turn the gas on, leave it there for, 15 seconds. That's enough for the fuel to flow into the carburetor, and it will start right up just fine. So, not first kick there. And there you go. There's some tips on how to start a vintage Vespa. Hope that helps everybody that isn't too familiar with starting one of these bad boys. Always tip to the left, full kicks. Can't just do that. That's not going to do it. And one thing to keep in mind, these aren't the best shoes for kickstarting. This thing, you can shin your ankle if you slip off the Kickstarter, so that's why you always want to have the rubber on there. But I usually use the palm of my foot and get a full kick through it. If it's parked on the center stand, you can start it, but it's not going to be a full kick. You can see it's limited in the travel. Hope that helps. I'll stop talking about how to start a Vespa. See all you guys next time. Robot here. Vespa Motorsport, San Diego, California, Scooter West.